Hello and welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. It's been a long week in US politics, but did BBC News go overboard in how it covered Donald Trump's inauguration and first few days as president? And was it in the UK's public interest to focus in news bulletins on the failure of a Trident missile test last year? It's been a busy and controversial first week in office for President Trump, and we've heard plenty about it on BBC News. It all started, of course, last Friday in Washington, D.C.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Before and after Donald Trump took the presidential oath of office, there were hours of coverage of the ceremony, plus speeches and analysis shown on 3 channels. BBC One and the News Channel were showing exactly the same coverage, with live commentary from Washington by the BBC's John Sopel and Catty Kay, while BBC Parliament was showing the same live feed provided by the American public service network C-SPAN, but without the BBC commentary. It was all too much for Leo McCann and Kate Reid, who wrote, "While clearly the election of a new US president is an important global news story, the level of saturation bordered on cultural imperialism, including live pictures across 3 BBC channels at once. We don't need endless footage of dreary details like motorcades crawling down avenues or guests arriving at luncheons." And Nick Bishop had also had enough before the end, emailing, "When the show is over, don't try and prolong it with mindless chit-chat. Move on to something else." Well, we put those points to BBC News and they told us, as with other important and historic events, we showed this programming on more than one BBC channel as we knew it would be of huge interest to our audiences. Over 1 million more people tuned into BBC One to watch President Trump's inauguration than normally do at that time of day, and our news channel audience was also higher than usual. In terms of commentary, our aim is to strike the right balance between allowing our audience to experience the event for themselves and explaining what is happening on the ground. Since last Friday, we've heard further complaints about the prominence in news headlines of the activities and pronouncements of the new president.
The White House is accused of telling falsehoods in a battle with the media about President Trump's inauguration.
The president opens his first full week in office by signing an order withdrawing the US from a major free trade deal with Pacific Rim countries. He meets business leaders at the White House and warns he will penalize American companies that move jobs overseas. More executive orders signed by President Trump. This time, he revives plans to build 2 oil pipelines despite environmental concerns.
He promised a wall. Now he says he's going to start building it in months. Donald Trump sets out his plans on immigration control.
Stepping down for the first time from Air Force One, President Trump looks ahead to his meeting with Mrs. May.
So I'm meeting with her tomorrow. I don't have my Commerce Secretary. They want to talk trade. So I'll have to handle it myself.
Speaking last night, the president again said he was determined to build a wall between Mexico and the US and suggested taxing their goods to pay for it.
So has BBC News been getting a bit carried away by the new presidency? Victoria Wells thought so, writing, "I've watched a lot of BBC News this week, and Trump's antics in the US dominate most of the main headlines. Whilst it is an interesting and newsworthy topic, its dominance concerns me. I can't help but feel there is a lot more in our own government that's likely to be going on under the radar of many news outlets that should really be brought to the public's attention." And Brian Gardner had this question. Newsworthy as he is, isn't it about time that news media, which he has heavily criticised, started starving Trump of the oxygen of publicity? Meanwhile, Theresa Riley wrote to us on Monday after she had settled down to watch a report on the Supreme Court's decision about Brexit. Suddenly, she wrote, the story was interrupted by breaking news. President Trump's press secretary was briefing the press. How does a non-critical briefing in the USA take precedence over our own news about Brexit? There is already hours upon hours of coverage of what Mr. Trump is doing and saying. It is getting difficult to find out what is happening in this country. Is UK news no longer important to the BBC? Do let us know your thoughts on the BBC's coverage of Donald Trump's presidency or any aspect of BBC News. Details of how to contact us coming up at the end of the programme. Now for some of your other concerns this week, starting with the BBC's coverage following a report in the Sunday Times that an unarmed missile went off course during a test last June. On his show that morning, Andrew Marr asked the Prime Minister about this several times.
When you made that first speech in July in the House of Commons about our Trident nuclear defence, did you know that misfire had occurred?
Well, I have absolute faith in our Trident missiles. When I made that speech in the House of Commons, what we were talking about was whether or not we should renew our Trident, whether or not we should have Trident missiles, an independent nuclear deterrent in the future.
Did you know that it happened?
I think we should defend our country. I think we should play our role in NATO with an independent nuclear deterrent. Jeremy Corbyn thinks differently. Jeremy Corbyn thinks we shouldn't defend our country.
This is a very serious incident. Did you know about it when you told the House of Commons?
And the issue that we were talking about in the House of Commons was a very serious issue.
The story was picked up prominently on BBC News bulletins over the next couple of days, but some viewers thought the concentration on it was ill-advised. Ken Sturt put it like this. So there was a misfire of Trident. How many cars failed tests during research and development? If work had been done on guidance or propulsion of the missile, why would we publicise to our potential enemies that we may not have this deterrent at this moment? And Maurice Sharrock echoed that, emailing, "It is not and never has been in the national interest to disclose such an event, especially when it is so very rare, even if reported in context, which it was not. But the BBC has deemed to publicise it to the world and even try to undermine the Prime Minister over this occurrence. Are you, the British Broadcasting Corporation, reporting news or trying to make it?" Now, we've been getting regular complaints on Newswatch about the way BBC News Online words some of its headlines in tweets and on the website. Another example came this week. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court ruled that Parliament must vote on whether the government can start the process of leaving the European Union. One of the campaigners who brought the case was Gina Miller, who has been subjected to a number of violent threats online. And that prompted BBC News to post a tweet asking, "Is Gina Miller the most hated woman in the UK?" It linked to a Woman's Hour discussion about her treatment, but led to a number of angry responses on Twitter. Martin Phelps answered the question posed like this. "No, she's done the country a great service. Your headline belongs in the gutter." Dave McNally thought, "That's a disgusting headline. Actively invites negative feedback." And Humza Yusuf wrote, "This is an awful, awful headline on BBC News, simply inviting abuse towards a woman who has said she's suffered a vile torrent of it already." Well, BBC News gave us a statement in response, which read, "This tweet reflected the issues Gina Miller talks about in her Woman's Hour interview and linked directly to the programme with the same headline. She discusses the impact of abuse and threats on her personal and professional life and says herself that she has been described as the most hated woman in the country, which was a key part of the interview." Wednesday's News at 10 took some viewers by surprise with its lead story, a special report from Ed Thomas on the marked increase in knife crime in the UK.
In 5 years' time, could be in jail, I could be dead, could be the biggest drug dealer in Liverpool. You never know, do you, till it happens.
Tonight, it's Liverpool. But this story could be told in many cities. It's one of knives, fear, and wasted lives.
Starts from, selling a bit of weed to selling a bit of Class A's.
When did you start carrying knives?
12.
Anne Good professed herself flabbergasted by the report, writing, "The BBC probably meant well. It looked like it had been put together by well-meaning but extremely naive journalists of a certain persuasion living in their metropolitan elite bubble. Believe me, these hooded and masked youths have other options in life. They crave the notoriety. Why, for heaven's sake, are you giving them the oxygen of publicity in their extremely expensive designer clothing?" Finally, it's been noticed this week that BBC political correspondent Carol Walker is an early riser. On Wednesday, she was on air in the cold just after 6 o'clock in the morning.
Well, our political correspondent Carol Walker is outside the Houses of Parliament for us. Morning to you once again, Carol. It's been a busy few days, but we're hearing in Tom's piece there about that Tory rebellion. How large a rebellion is that likely to be?
Well, it looks as though the number of Tories who will rebel against the government will actually be quite small.
And she was braving the elements in the same spot at the same hour on Friday.
Morning, Carol. I mean, the Prime Minister here has to walk a tightrope, doesn't she, between trying to get on with Donald Trump, with the president, but also not annoying everyone back here with what she says to him. I mean, she's under a lot of pressure, isn't she?
Yes, absolutely. This is going to be a very important, a very significant, but also a potentially very tricky meeting.
Carol was also out and about first thing on Tuesday, though in a different location.
Let's speak to our political correspondent, Carol Walker, who's outside the Supreme Court this morning. And I know they don't decide till 9:30, but what are the thoughts, Carol?
Well, the expectation widely is that the judgment will go against the government, that Theresa May will be told that she must seek the approval of Parliament before she can trigger Article 50.
As we've mentioned, the judgment did indeed go against her, but Steve Ketteringham had a question. Why on earth does the BBC send reporters to locations at 6 a.m. in the dark and cold when the place they are at is not even open? For instance, Carol Walker outside the Supreme Court when the actual news would not be available until 9:30. It's a total waste of money and resources when you have a perfectly adequate studio in London, lit and warm. Thank you for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions on BBC News and Current Affairs or even appear on the programme, you can call us on 0370 010 6676 or email newswatch@bbc.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter @NewsWatchBBC and do have a look at our website. The address for that is bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us. We'll be back to hear your thoughts about BBC News coverage again next week. Goodbye.